There's a question that changes everything. It's simple, almost too simple. Here it is. What are you serving? Not who, what. Because every single day, you're bowing to something. Maybe it's your fear. Maybe it's other people's opinions. Maybe it's the endless chase for more money, more status, more approval. But very few people ask themselves if they're serving the source that created them. And that's where the suffering begins. You see, we live in a world that teaches us to put everything else first. Your career, your image, your bank account, the approval of people who don't even know your real name. And we do it. We wake up and immediately start serving these things. We check our phones before we've even fully opened our eyes. We scroll through other people's lives before we've connected with our own. We start planning and worrying and strategizing before we've taken a single conscious breath. And here's what happens. You become a servant to the external world. You become reactive instead of creative. You start believing that your happiness depends on things outside of you, on whether you get that promotion, on whether that person likes you back, on whether you can afford that house or that car or that vacation. Your peace becomes conditional. Your joy becomes fragile. And you wonder why you feel so empty even when you're getting what you thought you wanted. Let me tell you something that most people never realize. When you don't put God first, you put your ego first by default. And your ego is terrified. It's always scared that you're not enough, that you don't have enough, that you might lose what you have. So it keeps you running on this hamster wheel of achievement and acquisition and approval seeking. It tells you that once you get there, wherever there is, then you'll finally be okay. Then you'll finally be worthy. Then you'll finally be at peace. But you get there and nothing changes inside. You still feel incomplete. You still feel anxious. You still feel like something's missing. And that's because you're looking in the wrong direction. You're seeking outside for what can only be found inside. You're trying to fill a spiritual void with material things. And it doesn't work. It can't work. It's like trying to satisfy your hunger by looking at pictures of food. Now I want you to really think about this. What does it mean to put God first? It doesn't mean you have to join a particular religion. It doesn't mean you have to follow specific rituals or rules. It means you align yourself with the creative intelligence that flows through everything. You recognize that there's something larger than your small self operating in this universe. You acknowledge that the same force that grows your hair and beats your heart and heals your cuts without you thinking about it is available to guide your entire life. When you put God first, you make decisions from a different place. You don't make them from fear. You don't make them from desperation. You don't make them based on what everyone else is doing or what society tells you should want. You make them from inner knowing, from intuition, from that quiet voice inside that actually has your best interests at heart. Think about how you start your day. Be honest with yourself. Do you wake up and immediately grab your phone? Do you start scrolling through social media, comparing your life to everyone else's highlight reel? Do you check your email and let other people's urgencies become your priorities? Or do you take even 5 minutes to connect with something deeper, to sit in silence, to meditate, to pray, to simply be present with the awareness that you're alive and that life itself is a miracle? Most people don't. Most people go from 0 to 60 the moment they open their eyes. They jump straight into doing mode without ever touching being mode. And then they spend their entire day reacting to circumstances instead of creating from consciousness. They let the external world dictate their internal state. They give their power away to traffic jams and difficult coworkers and disappointing news and 1,000 other things that are completely outside their control. But when you put God first, something shifts. You remember that you're not just this body and this personality and this collection of problems and responsibilities. You're connected to an infinite source of wisdom and creativity and love, and from that connection, you can handle whatever comes your way. Not because the circumstances change, but because you're seeing them through different eyes. Let me give you an example. 2 people lose their jobs on the same day. Same situation, same financial pressure, but one person has put God first and the other hasn't. The person who hasn't made that connection panics. They spiral into fear and anxiety. They start catastrophizing. They believe this setback defines them. They feel victimized by life. They might make desperate decisions that only make things worse. The other person, the one who has placed that divine intelligence first, responds differently. They still feel the disappointment. They still have practical concerns to address. But underneath all of that, there's a knowing, a trust. They understand that sometimes what looks like a setback is actually a setup for something better. They don't resist what is. They don't waste energy fighting reality. Instead, they ask, what is this situation here to teach me? Where is the opportunity in this challenge? How can I use this experience to grow? See the difference? Same external circumstance. Completely different internal response. And that internal response determines everything. It determines whether you move through difficulty with grace or get crushed by it. It determines whether you learn and evolve or just feel bitter and defeated. It determines whether you see life as happening to you or happening for you. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When you truly put God first, you stop trying to control everything. And this is hard for most people. We've been taught that we need to make things happen, that we need to force and push and manipulate circumstances to get what we want. We create elaborate plans and strategies. We try to anticipate every possible problem. We attempt to control other people's behavior so they'll give us what we need. And it's exhausting. It's like swimming upstream constantly. You're fighting against the current of life instead of flowing with it. You're operating from the belief that you know better than the universe how things should unfold. You're saying with your actions, if not your words, that you don't trust the intelligence that created billions of galaxies to handle your little life. But when you put God first, you develop a different relationship with life. You still take action. You still have goals and dreams, but you hold them lightly. You do your part, and then you surrender the outcome. You plant the seeds and trust the universe to provide the sunshine and rain. You show up fully in each moment without being attached to specific results. And paradoxically, this is when things start flowing more easily. You stop forcing. You start allowing. You stop chasing. You start attracting. You stop trying to make people love you or respect you or validate you. You start loving and respecting and validating yourself from that deep connection to Source. And then other people's opinions lose their power over you. Not because you don't care about people, but because you're not dependent on them for your sense of worth. Think about your relationships for a moment. How many of them are based on need instead of love? How many times do you interact with people from a place of what can I get instead of what can I give? How often are you trying to extract validation or security or happiness from another human being who's just as lost and scared as you are? When you put God first, your relationships transform. You stop looking for someone to complete you because you realize you're already whole. You stop trying to change people because you understand that everyone is on their own journey. You stop taking things personally because you recognize that other people's behavior is about them, not about you. You love without conditions. You give without keeping score. You show up authentically instead of playing roles. And yes, some relationships will fall away when you make this shift. Some people won't like the new you. The you that's not so easy to manipulate or control. The you that's not seeking their approval anymore. The you that's following inner guidance instead of external pressure. And that's okay. Let them go. The right people, the ones who resonate with the real you, will show up. But you can't do any of this if you're still putting other things first. If you're still making your career your God. If you're still making money your God. If you're still making other people's opinions your God. Because here's what happens. Whatever you put first becomes your master. And if it's anything other than that divine intelligence, you become enslaved to it. You become enslaved to your job. And you sacrifice your health and your relationships for it. You become enslaved to money. And you do things that violate your integrity to get more of it. You become enslaved to people's approval, and you twist yourself into shapes that aren't you trying to please everyone. And you lose yourself in the process. I've seen it thousands of times. Successful people by every worldly measure. Money in the bank. Impressive titles. Beautiful homes. And they're miserable. Completely miserable. Because they achieved everything their ego wanted, and they still feel empty inside. Because they put everything else first and God last. Or not at all. This is the psychological danger nobody talks about. We celebrate external achievement. We worship at the altar of success. We tell young people to go out there and make something of themselves. But we don't teach them that making something of yourself means nothing if you've lost touch with your essential self in the process. We don't teach them that climbing the ladder of success means nothing if it's leaning against the wrong wall. You can spend your entire life pursuing goals that aren't even yours. Dreams that were implanted by your parents or society or advertising. You can achieve every single one of them and still feel unfulfilled because they weren't aligned with your true purpose. They weren't coming from that deep place of knowing. They were ego goals, status goals, look at me goals. And the ego is never satisfied. Never. Give it what it wants and it immediately wants something else. But when you put God first, your goals change. You stop asking what will make me look good and start asking what will allow me to grow. You stop asking what will make me rich and start asking what will make me come alive. You stop asking what will impress other people and start asking what feels authentic to my soul. And from that place, you create a life that actually means something. Now, let me address something important. Some of you are thinking, this sounds nice, but it's not practical. You have real problems, real bills to pay, real responsibilities. You can't just sit around meditating and trusting the universe while your life falls apart. And I understand that concern, but you're missing the point. Putting God first doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean abandoning practical action. It means taking practical action from a place of inspiration instead of desperation. It means doing what needs to be done without the anxiety and fear that usually comes with it. It means showing up fully in your life while staying connected to something larger than your small self. In fact, you become more effective when you put God first, not less. Because you're not wasting energy on worry. You're not paralyzed by fear. You're not making decisions from scarcity consciousness. You're clear. You're focused. You're aligned. And things flow more easily, not because you're avoiding challenges, but because you're meeting them from a place of inner strength. Think about water. Water doesn't force its way. It finds the path of least resistance. It flows around obstacles. It's soft and yielding, and yet it can carve through solid rock over time. That's what you become like when you put God first. You don't become weak. You become fluid, adaptable, powerful in a completely different way than the ego's aggressive pushing and forcing. And here's something else. When you're truly aligned with Source, you develop discernment. You can tell the difference between your ego's voice and your intuition. Your ego sounds urgent and fearful. It catastrophizes. It compares you to others. It tells you you're not enough or you have to prove yourself. Your intuition is quiet. It's calm. It doesn't argue or justify. It simply knows. Most people can't hear their intuition because their minds are too noisy, too cluttered with other people's voices and societal programming and constant mental chatter. But when you put God first, when you create space for that connection through meditation or prayer or time in nature, your intuition gets stronger and your life gets easier because you're making decisions from wisdom instead of fear. You know which job to take. Not because it pays the most, but because it feels right. You know which relationship to invest in. Not because the person looks good on paper, but because your soul recognizes something authentic there. You know when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to wait, when to hold on and when to let go. Let me tell you what happens when you ignore this guidance. When you put everything else first and God last, you make decisions that look good externally but feel wrong internally. You take that high-paying job that kills your soul. You stay in that relationship that diminishes you because you're afraid of being alone. You move to that city because it's where successful people go, even though every cell in your body is telling you no. And then you spend years or even decades trying to make something work that was never meant for you. You keep pushing that square peg into a round hole. You keep telling yourself it'll get better. You just need to try harder, work more, adjust more. But it never feels right because you're living someone else's life. You're following someone else's blueprint. The psychological cost of this is immense. Depression, anxiety, addiction, chronic stress, physical illness, relationship problems, a pervasive sense of meaninglessness. These aren't random afflictions. They're symptoms of disconnection. Disconnection from your true self, from your purpose, from the divine intelligence that wants to express itself through you. But here's the good news. You can change this at any moment. Not someday, right now. You can make the decision to put God first. You can start with just 5 minutes in the morning, sitting quietly, breathing, asking to be shown your next right step, surrendering your agenda and opening to a higher will, and watch what happens. At first, nothing might seem to change externally. Your problems don't disappear. Your bank account doesn't magically increase. That difficult person in your life is still difficult. But something inside you shifts. You feel more centered, more peaceful, less reactive. And from that place, you start making different choices. Small choices at first. But they accumulate. You say no to something that doesn't serve you, even though people won't understand. You say yes to something that scares you because your intuition tells you it's right. You start honoring your needs instead of constantly sacrificing yourself for others. You start speaking your truth instead of telling people what they want to hear. You start living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And gradually, your external life begins to reflect your internal shift. Not because you're forcing it to, but because you've changed the frequency you're operating on. You're attracting different opportunities, different people, different experiences. Not better or worse necessarily, just more aligned with who you truly are. This is transformation. Real transformation. Not the kind that comes from positive thinking or visualization or any technique, but the kind that comes from genuine inner work, from facing yourself honestly, from admitting where you've been living in ego instead of essence, from having the courage to choose differently even when it's uncomfortable. And yes, it is uncomfortable. When you start putting God first, you have to confront all the ways you haven't been, all the compromises you've made, all the times you've betrayed yourself to fit in or get ahead, all the years you've spent building a life that looks impressive but feels hollow. This confrontation is painful, but it's necessary. You can't heal what you won't feel. Most people avoid this pain by staying busy, by distracting themselves with work or entertainment or drama, by numbing themselves with food or alcohol or shopping or social media, by pointing fingers at everyone else instead of looking at their own part, by staying in victim consciousness where nothing is their fault and they have no power to change anything. But when you put God first, you step into radical responsibility, not blame, responsibility. You recognize that while you can't control what happens to you, you can absolutely control how you respond. You can choose your thoughts, your attitudes, your actions. You can choose to see obstacles as opportunities. You can choose to learn from every experience. Instead of just reacting to it, you can choose to grow. And this is where your power lives. Not in controlling external circumstances, not in forcing life to go your way, but in choosing who you want to be in every moment, regardless of what's happening around you. Do you want to be the victim or the creator? Do you want to be reactive or responsive? Do you want to be governed by fear or guided by love? These are the real choices you're making every single day, whether you realize it or not. And when you put God first, you make these choices consciously. You catch yourself when you're slipping into old patterns. You notice when you're operating from ego. You gently redirect yourself back to center, back to source, back to truth. This practice never ends. It's not like you put God first once and you're done. You do it moment by moment, day by day, over and over again. Because the world is constantly pulling you away from that connection, constantly tempting you to put other things first, to chase the shiny object, to prove yourself, to get validation, to play small. But each time you choose differently, you strengthen that connection. You make it easier to access. You build a kind of spiritual muscle that allows you to stay centered even when life gets chaotic, even when things don't go your way, even when people disappoint you, even when you disappoint yourself. Because that's the other piece of this. Putting God first means extending compassion to yourself. It means recognizing that you're human, that you'll make mistakes, that you'll fall back into old patterns sometimes, that you'll forget and have to remember again. And that's okay. Spiritual growth isn't linear. It's a spiral. The key is not to beat yourself up when you stumble, not to decide you're a failure and give up, but to simply notice, acknowledge what happened without judgment, learn from it, and choose again. This is the practice. This is what it means to walk a spiritual path in a practical world. And as you do this work, as you consistently choose to put God first, you become a different person. Not overnight, but gradually. You become less judgmental of others because you've learned to be less judgmental of yourself. You become more patient because you understand that everyone is doing the best they can with the awareness they have. You become more generous because you're no longer operating from scarcity. You also become more peaceful. Not because your life is suddenly problem-free, but because you've stopped creating problems where none exist. You've stopped the constant mental argument with reality. You've stopped wishing things were different than they are. You've learned acceptance, real acceptance, not resignation, not giving up, but embracing what is so you can work with it instead of against it. This is mature spirituality, not the kind that promises miracles and manifestations if you just believe hard enough, but the kind that makes you resilient, grounded, present, capable of weathering any storm because you know the storm is just weather. It passes. And underneath all the turbulence, there's stillness. When you truly understand this, when you really get it in your bones, death itself loses its power over you. Not because you're not going to die. Of course you are. This body is temporary. But you recognize that what you truly are can't die. Consciousness itself doesn't die. It's the one constant, the one thing that's always here, aware, witnessing, being. And this realization changes everything. You stop living in fear. Fear of death, fear of loss, fear of not being enough. Because you understand that you're already everything you need to be. You're not lacking anything. You never were. You just forgot. You got hypnotized by the world into believing you were separate, alone, insufficient, but it was never true. This is what putting God first reveals to you. Your true nature, your essential wholeness, the love that you are beneath all the fear and conditioning and false beliefs. And from that place, you can do anything, be anything. Not because you're trying to prove something, but because you're expressing what's already there. Look at the way most people live. They're running, always running, from one thing to the next, from one achievement to the next. Disappointment. They never stop. They never pause. They never ask themselves why they're running or what they're running toward or what they're running from. And the answer, if they're honest, is that they're running from themselves, from the emptiness they feel inside, from the questions they don't want to answer, from the pain they don't want to feel, from the truth they don't want to face. So they fill their lives with noise and activity and distraction. But that voice doesn't go away. It gets louder. It manifests as restlessness, as dissatisfaction, as that gnawing feeling that something's missing even when you have everything you thought you wanted. And you can ignore it, you can suppress it, you can medicate it, but you can't silence it. Because it's the voice of your soul. Putting God first means finally listening to that voice, finally stopping the running, finally having the courage to be still and face whatever comes up. And yes, it's scary. Because when you stop distracting yourself, you have to deal with all the stuff you've been avoiding. The grief you never processed, the anger you never expressed, the dreams you gave up on. But here's what happens when you face it. When you stop running and turn around and look at what you've been so afraid of, you realize it's not as terrible as you thought. You realize you're strong enough to handle it. You realize that all that energy you were using to run away can now be used to heal, to grow. And this is the paradox. The thing you've been running from is actually the key to your freedom. The pain you've been avoiding holds the wisdom you need. The shadow you've been denying contains gifts you can't access any other way. But you only discover this when you stop running, when you put God first and trust that you're being guided. This is available to you right now. You don't have to wait until you hit rock bottom. You don't have to wait for a crisis to force you to wake up. You can choose to wake up today, this moment. You can choose to stop serving your fear and start serving the divine. But you have to understand something. This choice isn't a one-time thing. You have to keep choosing every single day, sometimes every single hour, because the pull of the old way is strong. The habits of a lifetime don't disappear overnight. There will be days when you forget, days when you slip back into old patterns. And that's when you need to be gentle with yourself. That's when you need to remember that this is a practice. And every time you notice you've strayed, every time you catch yourself and choose again, you're strengthening your commitment. This is how change happens. Not through dramatic transformations, but through consistent small choices, through showing up, through doing the work even when you don't feel like it, through putting God first even when your ego is screaming for attention. And slowly, things shift. You notice you're less reactive, less defensive, less desperate for external validation. You notice you can sit with discomfort without needing to fix it or escape it. You notice you're making decisions from a deeper place. You notice you're more present, more alive. Your relationships improve. Not because other people change, but because you're showing up differently. You're not needing them to be a certain way. You're not trying to get something from them. You're just being present. Offering love. Your work changes too. You stop doing things just for money or status. You start asking what contribution you want to make, what legacy you want to leave, how you want to use your gifts. And work becomes meaningful instead of just something you do to pay bills. Your whole relationship with life transforms. You stop seeing it as something you have to conquer or survive. You start seeing it as something to experience, to learn from. You stop holding back, stop playing it safe, stop waiting for permission, because that's what putting God first does. It removes the fear of failure. Not completely. You're still human, but underneath that nervousness is a foundation of trust, a knowing that you're being guided, that you're exactly where you need to be. This trust is radical. It goes against everything you've been taught. You've been taught to control, to plan, to protect yourself, to build walls. And there's wisdom in preparation. But there's a difference between intelligent planning and trying to control outcomes because you don't trust the process. When you put God first, you plan, you take action, you do your part, but then you release, you let go. You don't grip so tightly. You remain open to possibilities you haven't imagined. You stay flexible, you adapt, and life responds to this. Opportunities appear, synchronicities happen, the right people show up at the right time, doors open, not because you're manifesting or using some technique, but because you've removed the resistance. You start to see that you're part of something much larger than yourself, that you're not separate from life, but an expression of it, that the same intelligence that orchestrates the movement of planets is moving through you. And when you align with that, when you cooperate with it, everything becomes easier. Not in the sense that you don't face challenges. You do. But you face them with grace, with strength, with the knowledge that you can handle whatever comes, because you're not handling it alone. This is what faith really means. Not believing in some external deity that might or might not help you, but trusting the intelligence that created you, the love that sustains you, the presence that's always been with you. Putting God first is putting that trust first. And when you do, you discover something amazing. You discover that you've been seeking outside yourself for something that was inside you all along. Peace, joy, love, wholeness. It was never in that job or that relationship or that achievement. It was always within you. This is the homecoming, the return to yourself, to your true self. Not the self that was shaped by trauma and conditioning, but the self that existed before all of that. The innocent, open, loving being you were born as. That self is still there. Putting God first helps you strip away those layers. Not violently, not with judgment, but with compassion, with curiosity, with willingness to see the truth. And as the layers fall away, you begin to recognize yourself. You begin to remember. And from that remembering, everything flows. Your purpose becomes clear, your path reveals itself, your gifts emerge. Not because you're trying to figure it out with your mind, but because you're allowing it to unfold from a deeper knowing. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from responsibility or challenges, but freedom from the tyranny of the ego. Freedom from the constant need to prove yourself. Freedom from the exhausting effort of maintaining an image. You are enough. You always were. You just forgot. You don't have to figure it all out today. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to choose. Every morning, every moment. Who comes first? What guides your decisions? And when you truly place God first, everything else finds its proper place. Not because your problems disappear, but because you're finally seeing them from the right perspective. From the only perspective that truly matters.